The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a metal canyon. Hundreds of seats rose in perfect circles, each one filled with beings from across the known galaxy. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Taemin sat in Section 12, the area reserved for what the Council called developing species. His simple black suit looked plain next to the bright robes and glowing armor worn by the other delegates. He was a small man with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed older than his face. Most of the other ambassadors ignored him completely. This was exactly how Taemin preferred it. The emergency session had been called 3 days ago. Word spread quickly through the galaxy that humanity was in serious trouble. The charges were long and detailed: refusing to hand over criminals, building colonies in forbidden space, breaking trade agreements. The list went on and on. Taemin knew every charge was true. He also knew why his people had done these things. But nobody had asked for explanations yet. The hall fell silent as Council Speaker Nari rose from her central platform. She was from the Aquari people, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow under the chamber lights. Her large black eyes swept across the assembled delegates as she spoke. "We gather today to address serious violations of galactic law," Nari announced. Her voice carried clearly through the translation systems. The species known as humanity has repeatedly ignored Council directives over the past 10 years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In the upper sections where the major powers sat, Taemin could see delegates nodding and whispering to each other. Some looked angry, others seemed almost bored, as if this was just another minor problem to deal with. "The first charge," Nari continued, "involves the harbor of known criminals. 3 months ago, the Velkari Republic requested the extradition of the war criminal Keth Murdani. Humanity refused to comply. Prime Minister Jorak of the Velkari stood up in the front section. He was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished metal. His voice carried the clicking sounds typical of his species. Not only did they refuse, Jorak said, his metal teeth gleaming, but they gave this criminal sanctuary on one of their colony worlds. They called him a political refugee. This is unacceptable." More murmurs filled the hall. Taemin remained perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. He had been present when the Council voted to classify Keth Murdani as a war criminal. The Velkari had provided evidence that seemed overwhelming. What they had not mentioned was that Keth had tried to expose illegal weapons testing on civilian populations. "The second charge," Nari said, "concerns unauthorized colonization. Humanity has established settlements in the Kepler 442 system, which falls within disputed territory." This time it was Admiral Voss of the Centauri Alliance who spoke up. His people looked almost human, except for their silver eyes and the small ridges along their foreheads. "That system has been claimed by 3 different species," Voss declared. "The proper procedure is to wait for Council arbitration. Instead, humans simply moved in and started building cities." Taemin knew this was also true. The Kepler 442 system contained planets perfect for human colonization. More importantly, it contained something else that humanity desperately needed. But again, no one had asked for their reasons. The charges continued for another hour. Trade violations, refusing to share technology, ignoring communication protocols. Each accusation was backed up with detailed evidence and angry testimony from other species. Through it all, Taemin sat quietly and listened. He made notes on a small tablet, but mostly he just observed the other delegates. Many seemed genuinely upset with humanity's behavior. Others appeared to be going through the motions following the lead of the major powers. Finally, Nari called for order and addressed the human delegation directly. "Ambassador Taemin of Earth, you have heard the charges against your species. The evidence is clear and overwhelming. What is humanity's response to these accusations?" Taemin stood slowly. The hall fell completely silent as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the small human section. He walked to the speaking platform in the center of the floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. "Honored Speaker, Tamin began, his voice, calm and respectful. Humanity acknowledges that we have taken these actions. Surprised whispers filled the hall. Most delegates had expected denials or excuses. However, Tamin continued, we believe our actions were necessary and justified. We acted to protect innocent lives and to secure the survival of our species. Survival? Jorak's clicking voice cut through the air. Humans are in no danger. Your species has grown from 3 billion to nearly 50 billion in just 200 years. You have colonies on dozens of worlds. How can you claim to be fighting for survival? Tamin turned to face the Velkari Prime Minister. For just a moment, something flickered behind his kind eyes. Something old and careful and very, very dangerous. There are different kinds of survival, Prime Minister, Tamin said quietly. Sometimes survival means more than just staying alive. Enough riddles, Admiral Voss interrupted. The Council demands clear answers. Will humanity comply with galactic law or not? Tamin looked around the Great Hall one more time. He saw anger in some faces, impatience in others. A few delegates looked curious about his cryptic words, but most seemed ready to move on to punishment. And if we refuse to comply? Tamin asked. Nari's fins fluttered with what might have been nervousness. Then the Council will be forced to take military action. The combined fleets of the member species will ensure compliance. I see. Tamin paused, as if considering this carefully. And how much time do we have to make our decision? 72. Standard hours, Nari replied. This is more generous than required by law given the severity of the violations. Tamin bowed slightly. The human delegation thanks the Council for its patience. We will need to consult with our government on Earth. Very well, Nari said. This session is adjourned until humanity provides its final answer. As the delegates began to file out of the hall, many stopped to speak with each other in small groups. The general consensus seemed to be that this was a simple matter. Humanity would either submit to Council authority or face overwhelming military force. Either way, the problem would be resolved quickly. Tamin gathered his few belongings and walked toward the exit. As he passed through the crowd, he heard fragments of conversation. Poor humans, someone said. They have no idea what they are facing. 12 ships, another voice commented. That is their entire deep space fleet. How can they possibly resist? Perhaps they will see reason, a third delegate suggested. They are not stupid, just stubborn. Tamin smiled slightly as he heard these comments. The other species saw humanity as they wanted to see them. Young, aggressive, and ultimately helpless against the combined might of the galaxy. This was exactly what humanity had spent 50 years encouraging them to believe. Outside the Council building, Tamin walked to a quiet park where he could not be overheard. He activated his personal communicator and entered a complex encryption code. The device connected instantly to a secure channel that reached across hundreds of light years to Earth. This is Tamin, he said simply. The Council has made their position clear. We have 72 hours. The response came immediately in a voice that sounded tired but unsurprised. Understood, Ambassador. Are you certain this is the path they have chosen? Tamin looked back at the Council building, where lights still shone in many windows. Delegates were probably already making plans for the military operation that would force humanity into line. Yes, he said. They have made their choice. Now we must make ours. Very well. Please send the final diplomatic protocols to all relevant parties. Make sure they understand that we offered them alternatives. And after that? There was a long pause before the voice responded. After that, Ambassador, it will be time for the galaxy to learn who we really are. Tamin ended the connection and looked up at the alien stars shining overhead. In 72 hours, everything would change. The careful game humanity had played for half a century was about to end. He only hoped the galaxy would survive what came next. Admiral So Young stood in the command center of the UEF Incheon, watching the holographic display that showed Earth's orbital space. 12 ships hung in the darkness around humanity's homeworld. To any outside observer, they looked like simple exploration vessels with basic defensive capabilities. The appearance was carefully maintained and completely false. So Young was a woman in her 50s with short black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded starships for over 20 years, but nobody outside humanity knew her real experience. The official records showed her as a patrol captain who had been promoted during a recent reorganization. Those records were lies, like so many other things about humanity. Captain Jin Ho entered the command center carrying a secure data pad. He was younger than So Young, with the kind of face that made people trust him instantly. This had been very useful during humanity's decades of careful deception. "Admiral," Jin Ho said quietly, "we have received the final intelligence reports from our scouts." So Young took the data pad and read through the information. The Galactic Council was assembling the largest military force in recent history, 300 ships from 15 different species, including the massive Velkari dreadnoughts that were feared throughout the galaxy. "Impressive," So Young said without any trace of worry in her voice. "They are taking us seriously. Should we be concerned about the Centauri heavy cruisers?" Jin Ho asked. "Our public databases list them as having advanced shielding technology." So Young almost smiled. "Captain, how long have you been serving on deep space vessels?" Jin Ho looked confused by the question. 5 years, ma'am, since I graduated from the academy." "And what did they teach you about humanity's military capabilities?" "That we are a young species with limited technology," Jin Ho replied automatically. "Our ships are built for exploration and basic defense. We rely on speed and cleverness rather than raw firepower." "Correct," So Young said. "That is what they taught you. That is what they teach everyone. Even our own people believe it, until they reach a certain level of clearance." She handed the data pad back to Jin Ho and walked to the main viewing window. Outside, the other human ships moved in slow, careful patterns around Earth. They looked peaceful, almost fragile compared to the warships that other species built. "Captain," So Young said, "in your academy training, did you ever wonder why humanity was accepted into the galactic community so easily?" Jin Ho frowned. "The official history says we impressed them with our rapid technological development and peaceful intentions." "The official history says many things," So Young replied. "Most of them are true, from a certain point of view, but they do not tell the complete story." She activated a control panel built into the wall. The lights in the command center dimmed, and the viewing window became transparent from both sides. Now they could see clearly into space, but anyone outside could also see in. "What you are about to learn," So Young said, "is classified at the highest levels. Until today, fewer than 10,000 humans knew the complete truth about our species." Jin Ho straightened unconsciously. Around the command center, other officers had stopped their work to listen. Most of them were young, like Jin Ho. They had grown up believing the same carefully constructed stories about humanity's place in the galaxy. 50 years ago, when we first encountered alien civilizations, we had a choice to make. So Young continued. "We could reveal our true capabilities and risk being seen as a threat. Or we could hide our strength and observe the galaxy from within." "Our true capabilities?" Jin Ho asked. So Young touched another control. The view outside changed, showing archived footage from 50 years ago. Human ships that looked nothing like the current fleet filled the display. They were larger, more complex, and somehow more frightening than anything currently used by galactic civilizations. "This was the Earth Defense Force as it existed when we made first contact," So Young explained. "We had been spacefaring for over 300 years. We had colonies in 17 star systems. Our technology was centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed. The footage showed human vessels moving through space with impossible grace. They seemed to bend light around themselves, becoming nearly invisible. Some appeared to be in multiple locations at once, as if the laws of physics did not apply to them normally. But we had also learned some hard lessons," So Young went on. "We had seen what happened to species that grew too powerful too quickly. We had watched civilizations destroy themselves with their own technology. Most importantly, we had discovered that we were not alone in the universe. New images appeared on the display. They showed things moving in the deep spaces between stars, dark shapes that hurt to look at directly, ancient structures that belong to no known species. There are older things in the galaxy, So Young said, quietly. Things that notice when younger species become too advanced too quickly, things that take action to preserve what they see as the proper order. Jinho stared at the images with growing understanding and horror. So we hid. We hid, So Young confirmed. We dismantled our colonies and brought our people back to Earth. We built new ships that looked primitive and weak. We created false histories and limited technologies. For 50 years, we have played the role of an eager young species learning from our betters. She turned away from the display to face Jinho directly. And now the Council believes they can force us to submit with 300 ships. The irony was not lost on anyone in the command center. Several officers were trying not to smile, Lieutenant. Heejin looked up from her communication station. Admiral, we are receiving final confirmation codes from all vessels in the fleet. Thank you, Lieutenant So Young replied. Signal all ships to begin Phase 1 preparations. Phase 1? Jinho asked. So Young walked to the command chair at the center of the room. It looked like a standard captain's chair, but as she sat down, hidden panels opened around it. Displays appeared that showed information no galactic civilization had ever seen before. Phase 1 is revealing our true nature to the rest of the fleet, So Young explained. Most of our crews still believe they are serving on exploration vessels. They need to understand what they are really part of. She activated the ship's internal communication system. Attention all crew members of the UEF Incheon, her voice carried throughout the ship. This is Admiral So Young, in approximately 60 hours. This vessel will engage in combat operations against overwhelming odds. Before that happens, you need to know the truth about what you are serving aboard. Throughout the ship, crew members stopped their work to listen. In engineering, Chief Engineer Daeho paused while checking the ship's power systems. On the bridge, Navigator Soo-jin looked up from her star charts. In the weapons bay, gunner mate Kyung-min stopped his routine maintenance. The ship you are serving on is not an exploration vessel, So Young continued. It is one of humanity's most advanced warships, disguised to appear harmless to outside observers. The weapon systems you have been told are defensive only, are capable of destroying entire fleets. The engines you know as efficient but limited can move this ship in ways that violate known physics. She paused to let this information sink in. Each of you volunteered for deep space service because you wanted to explore the galaxy and represent humanity among the stars. That was not a lie. But you were also chosen because our leaders believed you could handle the truth about what humanity really is. On every deck of the ship, crew members looked at each other with new understanding. Equipment they had used for years suddenly made sense in ways it never had before. Systems they had been told were experimental or decorative revealed their true purpose. In the next few hours, this ship will transform from its disguised configuration to its true form, So Young announced. You will see technology that officially does not exist. You will use weapons that should be impossible. And you will help send a message to the galaxy about what happens when humanity is truly threatened. She ended the announcement and turned to Jinho, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and concern. Captain, do you have any questions about our new mission? Jinho was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, despite everything he had just learned. Just one question, Admiral. Are we the good guys in this? So Young considered this seriously. It was the right question to ask, and she respected Jinho more for asking it. We are what we have to be, she said finally. The galaxy has forced this choice upon us. We offered them cooperation and friendship. They have chosen to meet us with overwhelming force instead. She stood up from the command chair and walked back to the viewing window. Outside, the first changes were already beginning. The other ships in humanity's fleet were starting to shed their disguises, revealing hints of their true nature. Captain Jinho, signal the fleet. Begin transformation sequence. It is time for the galaxy to see what 12 human warships really look like. As Jinho moved to carry out the order, So Young remained at the window. In a few hours, the careful deception that humanity had maintained for 50 years would be over. There would be no going back to the simple days when they were just another young species learning their place in the galaxy. But perhaps it was time for that anyway. Perhaps it was time for the galaxy to learn what humans truly were. Fleet Commander Zeth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Velkari Dreadnought Supremacy, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. 300 ships from across the galaxy formed a massive wall of firepower in space. The combined fleet stretched for thousands of kilometers in perfect battle formation. Zeth was tall even for a Velkari, with 4 arms that ended in sharp metal claws. His skin had the polished chrome appearance that came with age and rank among his people. He had commanded fleets for over 60 years and had never lost a battle. "Status report," Zeth ordered, his voice carrying the clicking sounds of his native language. "All ships report ready for combat," his tactical officer replied. "Long-range sensors show the human fleet exactly where intelligence predicted. 12 ships holding position at the edge of the system. Only 12, Zeth mused. Either they are incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." His communications officer looked up from her station. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They are requesting to speak with you directly." Zeth's compound eyes glittered with amusement. "Put them through. Let us hear what they have to say before we destroy them." The main view screen activated, showing the bridge of a human vessel. The woman who appeared wore a simple uniform with admiral's insignia. She looked calm and composed, as if she was discussing routine patrol duties rather than facing impossible odds. "I am Admiral So Young of the United Earth Forces," the human said. "You must be Fleet Commander Zeth." "I am," Zeth replied. "I assume you are calling to surrender. This would be wise, given your situation." Admiral So Young smiled slightly. "Actually, I am calling to give you one final chance to withdraw your forces and return to your home systems." The bridge of the Velkari flagship fell silent. Several officers looked at each other in disbelief. Zeth himself was so surprised that his clicking sound stopped for several seconds. "You are offering us a chance to withdraw?" Zeth finally asked. "Human, you face 300 ships with only 12. Our smallest vessels outgun your largest. What possible reason would we have to withdraw?" "Because," So Young said calmly, "you do not understand what you are really facing." Zeth's amusement returned. "Enlighten me." "For 50 years, humanity has been playing a careful game," So Young explained. "We allowed the galaxy to see us as a young, primitive species. We hid our true capabilities and pretended to be grateful, students learning from our betters." "Your point?" Zeth asked impatiently. "The game is over," So Young said simply. "You are about to discover what humanity really is." She paused for a moment, then spoke a single word into her communicator. "Activate." Throughout the human fleet, space itself began to change. The 12 ships that had appeared small and fragile suddenly blazed with energy signatures that made no sense according to known physics. Reality seemed to bend around them as systems came online that officially did not exist. On the Supremacy's bridge, the science officer stared at his instruments. In horror. "Commander," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "their energy output just increased by a factor of 10,000. No, wait, that cannot be right. The readings are still climbing." Zeth moved to look at the displays himself. The numbers made no sense. The power signatures from the human ships were beyond anything in his experience. "Impossible," he muttered. "No ships that size could generate that much energy." "Size is relative, Commander." Admiral So Young's voice came from the view screen. "What you are seeing is not 12 small exploration vessels. You are looking at 12 of humanity's most advanced warships, finally dropping their disguises." As she spoke, the human ships began to change. Hull plates shifted and reconfigured. Weapon ports opened that had never been visible before. Most disturbing of all, the ships seemed to be occupying more space than they had moments earlier, as if they were unfolding from dimensions that the eye could not follow. "What are you?" Zeth demanded. "We are humanity," So Young replied. "We are the species that survived when our home star began to fail. We rebuilt our civilization from nothing and learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. We have been watching and waiting for 3 centuries while the rest of the galaxy played with primitive technologies. She leaned forward in her command chair. We are also the species that has been protecting this galaxy from things far worse than any of you have imagined. But perhaps it is time we stopped doing that. The tactical displays on the Supremacy showed impossible readings. The human ships were moving in ways that violated basic physics. Some appeared to be in multiple locations at once. Others seemed to exist partially outside normal space. All ships, Zeth ordered, trying to maintain control of the situation. Prepare to engage. Target the lead vessel. Commander, his weapons officer called out. Targeting systems cannot lock onto their ships. They are generating some kind of dimensional interference. Then fire at their last known positions, Zeth snarled. The combined firepower of 50 council ships opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled the space where the human fleet had been moments before. None of them found their targets. The human ships had simply moved out of the way, but not in any manner that made sense. They had not accelerated or changed course. They had simply been in one place and were now in another, as if the space between had never existed. Impossible, the tactical officer whispered. Very possible, Admiral So Young's voice corrected. You are thinking in terms of moving through space. We learned long ago to move space itself. Before anyone on the Velkari bridge could respond, one of the human ships fired back. It was not a beam or projectile. It was something that existed on the edge of physical law, a focused manipulation of reality that struck one of the Council's heavy cruisers. The ship did not explode or burn. It simply ceased to exist as if it had never been built. The silence that followed was absolute. This is your final warning, Admiral So Young said, her voice still calm and reasonable. Withdraw your forces now, or discover why humanity stopped building ships designed merely to destroy enemies. These vessels can unmake matter at the quantum level. Fleet Commander Zeth looked at his tactical displays. In the span of 30 seconds, everything he thought he knew about warfare had become obsolete. His massive fleet, the pride of galactic civilization, suddenly looked like children playing with toys. What do you want? He asked quietly. We want to be left alone, So Young replied. We want the galaxy to stop trying to force us into submission. Most importantly, we want the Council to understand that humanity is not a species that can be bullied or threatened. She stood up from her chair. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing your forces. If you do not, we will be forced to demonstrate our capabilities more dramatically. Zeth looked around his bridge at officers who were staring at him with fear and confusion. His fleet had been designed to intimidate a primitive species into submission. Instead, they had encountered something that made their most advanced weapons look like stone knives. All ships, he said slowly. Prepare to withdraw to hyperspace. Sir? His tactical officer asked in disbelief. You heard me, Zeth snapped. Begin immediate withdrawal. As the Council fleet began to retreat, Admiral So Young's image remained on the view screen. Commander Zeth, she said, when you report this incident to your superiors, make sure they understand one thing. Today you have seen humanity when we are being polite and reasonable. You do not want to see what we become when we are not. The transmission ended, leaving Zeth staring at a blank screen as his 300 ships fled from 12 human vessels. For the first time in his 60 years of military service, Fleet Commander Zeth had encountered something that frightened him more than death itself. He had met humanity when they stopped pretending to be weak. Captain Minsu stood on the bridge of the destroyer Busan, watching his instruments with amazement and growing fear. The Council fleet had returned in greater numbers, 700 ships this time, led by the massive Centauri battle station, Judgment. They had called for reinforcements from every major civilization in the galaxy. The humans still had only 12 ships. Captain, his tactical officer reported, the enemy fleet is taking attack formation. They are keeping much greater distance this time. Minsu nodded. The Council had learned from their first encounter. They were treating humanity as a serious threat now, which was both good and bad news. Any word from Admiral So Young? He asked. Yes, sir. She says we should prepare for demonstration phase 2. Minsu felt a chill run down his spine. He had been serving on human warships for 15 years, but he had only learned about Phase 2 capabilities yesterday. Even among humanity's military leaders, the knowledge was restricted to the highest levels. The main view screen activated, showing the bridge of the enemy flagship. Admiral Voss of the Centauri Alliance appeared, his silver eyes hard with determination and fear. "Human vessels," Voss announced. "You are surrounded and outnumbered by more than 50 to 1. Our combined firepower could destroy entire star systems. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to galactic law." Admiral So Young's image replaced Voss on the screen as she responded from the Incheon. "Admiral Voss, we warned you what would happen if you returned with hostile intent. You chose not to listen." "Your tricks worked once," Voss replied. "But we have analyzed the recordings from your first encounter. We have adapted our tactics and increased our numbers. You cannot possibly win against 700 ships." So Young was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that had not been there before. "Admiral, there is something you need to understand about humanity. We did not become what we are through conquest or aggression. We became this way through survival." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that every technology we possess, every capability we have developed, exists because at some point in our history we faced extinction and had to evolve or die." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "What you are about to witness is not us showing off our power. It is us doing what we have always done when faced with overwhelming odds. We adapt." So Young turned away from the camera and spoke to her crew. "All ships activate Phase 2 systems. Show them what humanity learned to do when the first alien invasion fleet arrived at Earth 200 years ago. Throughout the human fleet, new systems came online. These were not the reality manipulation devices they had shown before. These were something else entirely, something that had been built in desperation when humanity faced enemies that seemed undefeatable." On the Busan, Captain Minsu watched as his ship began to change in ways that should not have been possible. The hull seemed to become fluid, reshaping itself according to tactical requirements. Weapon systems emerged that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most disturbing of all, the ship began to multiply. "What is happening?" the tactical officer whispered. "Quantum duplication," Minsu replied, his mouth dry. "The ship is creating copies of itself across parallel probability streams. Where there had been one destroyer, there were now 5. Then 10. Then 20. Each one was completely real and fully functional. The same transformation was happening throughout the human fleet. 12 ships became 60, then 120, then more than the sensors could track accurately." On the enemy flagship, Admiral Voss stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. "How many ships are there now?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied. "The readings keep changing. Some of the vessels appear to exist in the same space simultaneously. Others seem to be firing from positions they have never occupied." "This is impossible," Voss said. "Matter cannot be duplicated. Energy cannot be created from nothing." Admiral So Young's voice came through the communication system. "You are correct, Admiral. Matter cannot be duplicated and energy cannot be created. But reality can be adjusted. When you have access to parallel dimensions, the rules become more flexible." The human fleet opened fire. The weapons they used defied every law of physics the Council understood. Beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck targets from directions that should not have been possible. Projectiles appeared inside enemy ships without passing through their hulls. Some weapons seemed to travel backward through time, hitting their targets before they had been fired. The results were devastating. Council ships disappeared not with explosions but with quiet pops of displaced air. Others found their weapon systems transforming into harmless materials. Some vessels discovered that their crews had been transported safely to nearby planets, while their ships remained empty and powerless. In less than 10 minutes, the 700-ship fleet had been reduced to scattered groups of confused and terrified survivors. "Cease fire," So Young ordered. The impossible weapons fell silent. The duplicated human ships faded away until only the original 12 remained. Space returned to something resembling normal physics. Admiral Voss appeared on the communication screen again, but now his face was pale and his silver eyes were wide with shock. "What are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are what becomes of a species that refuses to die," So Young replied. "We are what happens when a civilization faces extinction 17 different times and survives each one." She stood up from her command chair. 200 years ago, an alien species called the Devourers found Earth. They had consumed dozens of civilizations and planned to add humanity to their list. They had weapons that could destroy planets and shields that could stop any attack. The view screen showed archived images of massive black ships that seemed to absorb light itself. Humanity had 3 choices, So Young continued. We could run, we could hide, or we could become something the Devourers had never encountered before. "What did you choose?" Voss asked. "We chose to become impossible," So Young said simply. "We developed technologies that should not exist. We learned to manipulate probability itself. We became a species that could not be conquered because we were no longer limited by the normal rules of reality." She looked directly at Admiral Voss. When the Devourers arrived, they found a humanity they were not prepared to fight. We did not destroy them. We convinced them to leave by demonstrating that we had become something beyond their understanding. Captain Minsu listened to this history with growing amazement. He had known that humanity was more advanced than they appeared, but he had never imagined the true scope of their capabilities. "Why hide this from the galaxy?" Admiral Voss asked. "Because we learned something important from our encounters with the Devourers," So Young replied. "Power of this magnitude attracts attention from things far worse than any military force. There are entities in the deep spaces between galaxies that notice when younger species become too advanced too quickly." New images appeared on the screen, showing things that hurt to look at directly. Ancient structures that belonged to no known civilization. Movement in the cosmic void where nothing should exist. "We have been protecting this galaxy from those entities for 2 centuries, So Young explained. "We have maintained barriers and defenses that keep the really dangerous things at bay. But we could only do this effectively by remaining hidden and underestimated." She sat back down in her command chair. "Your council has forced us to reveal ourselves. We hope you are prepared for the consequences of that choice." Admiral Voss was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had heard and witnessed. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now you return to your governments and tell them exactly what you have seen here," So Young said. "Tell them that humanity is not a species that can be threatened or bullied. Tell them that we have capabilities beyond their current understanding." She paused. "Most importantly, tell them that we are offering one final chance for peaceful coexistence. The galaxy can accept humanity as an equal partner, or it can face the consequences of forcing us to abandon our protective role." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Voss staring at a blank screen as the human fleet prepared to return to Earth. Captain Minsu looked around his bridge at crew members who were still trying to process what they had witnessed. They had served on what they thought was a simple destroyer. Instead, they had been part of a vessel capable of rewriting the laws of physics. "Captain," his tactical officer asked quietly, "are we the only ones who know the truth about humanity?" Minsu considered the question carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "that we are about to find out just how much truth the galaxy can handle." Lieutenant Commander Yu Jin stood in the weapons control center of the UEF Seoul, watching displays that showed impossible things. 3 weeks had passed since the second encounter with Council forces, and the galaxy had not responded as humanity had hoped. Instead of accepting the offered peace, the major civilizations had formed the largest military alliance in galactic history. Nearly 2,000 ships from 23 different species were gathering at the edge of human space. They had declared humanity a threat to galactic civilization and demanded immediate surrender. "Status report," Admiral So Young's voice came through the communication system from the flagship Incheon. "Enemy fleet is maintaining position at maximum weapons range," Yu Jin reported. "They appear to be waiting for something. Probably reinforcements," Captain Yunwoo said from his position at the tactical console. Intelligence suggests several species are bringing their entire military forces to this battle. Yujin nodded grimly. The Council had decided that humanity represented an existential threat that had to be eliminated completely. They were no longer interested in forcing submission. They wanted humanity destroyed. The irony was that in trying to destroy humanity, they were about to discover why that was impossible. All ships, Admiral So-Young's voice announced. Prepare for final phase demonstration. Authorization code Omega-77. Yujin felt her breath catch in her throat. Omega-77 was the authorization code for humanity's most closely guarded secret. Even among the crew of advanced warships, fewer than a dozen people on each vessel knew what it meant. She entered her command codes and watched as systems came online that had never been activated before. These were not weapons in any traditional sense. They were tools that humanity had developed for their ultimate survival scenario, the scenario where they faced complete extinction and had no choice but to reveal what they had truly become. Lieutenant. Commander? Captain Yunwoo said quietly. Are you ready for this? Yujin looked around the weapons center at her fellow officers. They were all young, all dedicated to protecting humanity from the threats that surrounded them. None of them had ever imagined they would be part of something like this. Ready or not, she replied. It is time for the galaxy to understand what happens when you try to destroy humanity. The main view screen activated, showing the bridge of the enemy flagship. Supreme Commander Thane of the Rigelian Empire appeared, his blue-scaled face set in grim determination. Behind him stood representatives from dozens of species, all united, in their belief that humanity had to be stopped. Human vessels, Thane announced. You are surrounded by the combined might of galactic civilization. Our fleet contains nearly 2,000 ships equipped with the most advanced weapons in known space. You cannot possibly survive what is coming. Admiral So-Young appeared on the return transmission. She looked tired, as if she had not slept in days. Supreme Commander, I am going to ask you one final time to reconsider your course of action. What you are about to witness will change everything. There will be no going back after this. The time for talk is over, Thane replied. You have demonstrated technologies that threaten the balance of power in the galaxy. You cannot be allowed to exist. So-Young sighed deeply. Very well. You have made your choice. Now you will see what humanity becomes when we have no other options. She turned away from the camera and spoke to her fleet. All ships activate Omega protocols. Show them what we learned to do when we face the heat death of the universe itself. Throughout the human fleet, reality began to change in fundamental ways. The 12 ships did not just multiply this time. They began to exist across multiple timelines simultaneously, drawing resources and capabilities from versions of themselves that existed in parallel universes. On the Sol, Yujin watched, her instruments register power levels that should have been impossible. The ship was not just duplicating itself, it was becoming connected to every possible version of itself across infinite realities. What is happening? One of her junior officers asked in amazement. We are becoming what we were always meant to be, Yujin replied, though she barely understood it herself. The human ships began to move in ways that hurt to watch. They existed in multiple locations simultaneously while also being nowhere at all. They fired weapons that struck targets in the past, present, and future all at once. But most disturbing of all was what happened to space itself around the human fleet. Reality began to rewrite itself according to humanity's will. The laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolute rules. Time flowed in directions that had no names. Gravity became optional. Impossible, Supreme Commander Thane whispered as his instruments registered readings that made no sense. Not impossible, Admiral So-Young corrected. Just improbable. When you have access to infinite parallel realities, improbable things become inevitable. The Council fleet opened fire with everything they had. 2,000 ships unleashed enough destructive power to sterilize entire star systems. The space between the fleets blazed with energy as weapons that could crack planets filled the void. None of it touched the human ships. The attacks were absorbed, redirected, or simply edited out of existence. Some were reflected back at their sources with interest. Others were transformed into harmless light shows or beautiful displays of aurora-like colors. Then humanity fired back. What emerged from the human ships was not weapons fire in any recognizable sense. It was applied impossibility, focused paradox, weaponized mathematics that existed beyond normal reality. Council ships found their armor transformed into flower petals. Weapon systems became musical instruments that played haunting melodies. Some vessels discovered that their crews had been transported to pleasant vacation planets, while their ships remained behind as empty monuments. Others simply stopped existing, not destroyed, but edited out of reality, as if they had never been built. "Stop!" Supreme Commander Thane called out desperately. "We surrender. We yield. Please stop." The impossible attack ceased immediately. "You surrender?" Admiral So Young asked, her voice carrying surprise. "Yes," Thane replied, his voice shaking. "We surrender completely. We will agree to any terms you set, just please do not destroy us." So Young was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "Supreme Commander, we never wanted to destroy you. We only wanted to be left alone to continue our work protecting the galaxy." "Protecting the galaxy from what?" Admiral So Young gestured, and the view screen showed images that made everyone who saw them wish they had not. Things moving in the spaces between galaxies, ancient entities that had existed since the universe was young, consciousness so vast and alien that contact with them could drive entire species insane. "From them," So Young said simply, "we have been maintaining barriers that keep these entities from noticing your civilizations. We have been fighting a war for 200 years that none of you knew was happening." She stood up from her command chair. "Every time we have been forced to reveal more of our capabilities, we have made ourselves more visible to these entities. Your attacks have required us to use technologies that will definitely attract their attention." Supreme Commander Thane stared at the images with growing horror. "What does that mean for us?" "It means that the age of innocence is over," So Young replied. "The galaxy is about to discover that there are things far more dangerous than humanity in the universe, and humanity may not be able to protect you from all of them anymore." She looked directly at the camera. "You wanted to know what we are. Supreme Commander, we are the species that stands guard while others sleep. We are the ones who keep the monsters at bay so that the rest of the galaxy can live in peace." The transmission paused as Admiral So Young received a report from one of her officers. "And now," she said, her voice tight with concern, "our sensors are detecting movement in the deep void. Something is coming. Something that has noticed our display of power and is investigating." On her ship, Lieutenant Commander Yu Jin watched the long-range sensors with growing dread. Something massive was moving through the space between galaxies, heading directly for their location. "How long do we have?" Captain Yunwu asked. "Unknown," Yujin replied. "But whatever it is larger than anything we have ever encountered before." Admiral So Young's voice came over the fleet communications one final time. "All council ships withdraw immediately to your home systems. Prepare your defenses and warn your governments. The galaxy is about to face its greatest test." She paused. "And pray that humanity is strong enough to stand between you and what is coming." 6 months had passed since the battle that changed everything. Ambassador Taemin walked through the corridors of the rebuilt Galactic Council station, noting the changes that had been made. The building looked the same from the outside, but the interior reflected new realities. Human technical advisors worked alongside alien engineers, helping to upgrade defensive systems with technologies that had been impossible just a year ago. The walls themselves now contained protective barriers that existed in multiple dimensions, keeping the station safe from threats that conventional defenses could not stop. Taemin entered the main assembly hall and took his position at the central podium. The human delegation no longer sat in Section 12 with the minor species. They now occupied the speaker's platform, reflecting their new role as the galaxy's protectors. The hall was quieter than it had been in decades. Representatives from 47 species sat in respectful silence, waiting to hear humanity's latest guidance. The old system of arguing and posturing had ended when everyone realized what they were really facing. Council Speaker Nari rose from her position in the front row. Her aquatic features showed the strain of recent months, but also a new kind of respect that had not been there before. The Assembly recognizes Ambassador Tae-min of the Terran Protectorate, she announced formally. Tae-min nodded graciously and activated the holographic display systems. Images appeared above the Assembly, showing the current state of galactic defenses. "Thank you, Speaker Nari," he said in his calm, grandfatherly voice. "I am pleased to report that the barrier installations in the outer rim sectors are now complete. We have successfully established protective zones around all inhabited systems." Murmurs of relief filled the hall. The barriers were humanity's gift to the galaxy, shields that would hide younger civilizations from the entities that lived in the deep void. "However," Tae-min continued, "we must discuss the cost of maintaining these defenses." The hall fell silent again. Everyone knew that humanity's protection came with requirements. As we have explained, the technologies needed to maintain galactic security require enormous amounts of resources and energy. More importantly, they require the cooperation of all civilized species. He gestured, and the display showed updated charts of military forces throughout the galaxy. "I am pleased to announce that the Velkari Republic has completed the decommissioning of their offensive weapon systems. Prime Minister Jorek's government has redirected their military resources toward defensive and exploration purposes." Prime Minister Jorek stood and bowed formally. His metal features showed none of the arrogance that had been present 6 months ago. "The Velkari people are honored to serve the greater good," he said humbly. "We offer our industrial capabilities to support the Terran Protectorate's defensive efforts." Similar announcements followed from other major civilizations. The Centauri Alliance had converted their battle fleets into rescue and exploration vessels. The Rigelian Empire had begun sharing their advanced scientific knowledge freely with younger species. Throughout the galaxy, the age of military competition had ended. Not through conquest, but through the realization that there were far more important things to worry about. "We have also received positive reports from the integration centers," Tae-min continued. "Species that were previously restricted or oppressed have been granted full membership in galactic civilization. This had been one of humanity's non-negotiable demands. The old system of classifying species by their military power had been abolished. Now civilizations were judged by their contributions to galactic security and the welfare of all sentient beings. Captain Yunji, now serving as humanity's military liaison to the Council, stood to give her report. Her uniform bore new insignia reflecting her role as Director of Galactic Defense. "Our patrol fleets report no hostile activity in any monitored sectors," she announced. "Piracy has been reduced to less than 1% of previous levels. Interspecies conflicts have ceased entirely. The transformation had been remarkable. Fear of humanity's capabilities had certainly played a role, but there was more to it than that. The revelation of the true threats facing the galaxy had united the various species in ways that centuries of diplomacy had failed to achieve. Most importantly," Captain Yunji continued, "our deep space monitoring stations have detected no further intrusions from entities beyond the galactic rim. The barriers appear to be functioning as designed." This news brought visible relief to many delegates. The thing that had been attracted by humanity's display of power 6 months ago had been dealt with. Nobody outside humanity's leadership knew exactly what had happened in the deep void, but the threat had not materialized. Ambassador Tae-min returned to the podium. "Before we conclude today's session, I want to address the questions that many of you still have about humanity's role in galactic affairs." He paused, looking around the assembly with the same kind eyes that had first appeared in this hall a year ago. "We did not seek the position we now hold. We would have preferred to continue our quiet work of protection while remaining unnoticed and underestimated. Your governments forced this revelation upon us." Some delegates looked uncomfortable at this reminder. "However," Tae-min continued, "we accept the responsibilities that come with our capabilities. We will continue to protect the galaxy from threats that conventional military forces cannot handle. We will share our knowledge to help all species advance and prosper. We will maintain the peace that allows civilizations to grow and explore." He activated a new display showing images from across the galaxy. Refugees being resettled on safe worlds. Scientific expeditions exploring previously forbidden regions of space. Trade convoys moving freely between star systems under human protection. In return, we ask only that you remember the lessons of recent months. Power without wisdom leads to destruction. Competition without cooperation leads to stagnation. Fear of the unknown leads to isolation and weakness. The display showed one final image, a view of the galaxy as seen from the deep void. Billions of stars holding countless worlds and trillions of sentient beings, all protected by barriers maintained by a species that had learned to transcend their original limitations. We are all part of something larger than ourselves, Taemin said quietly. The galaxy is a garden that requires constant tending. Together we can make it flourish. He stepped back from the podium. This session is now concluded. May your travels be safe and your decisions be wise. As the delegates filed out of the assembly hall, many stopped to speak with the human representatives. The conversations were respectful, sometimes awed, but no longer fearful. Humanity had demonstrated that their power was matched by their restraint. Later that evening, Ambassador Taemin stood in his private quarters looking out at the stars. His personal communicator activated, connecting him to a secure channel that reached across the galaxy to hidden stations where humanity's true guardians maintained their eternal vigil. "This is Taemin," he said simply. "Status report." The response came from Captain Dal Ho, now serving aboard one of humanity's deep void monitoring stations. "All barriers are stable, Ambassador. No unauthorized entities detected in any sector. The galaxy sleeps peacefully tonight." "And the cost?" "Within acceptable parameters. The new power sources are functioning efficiently. We can maintain current protective measures indefinitely." Taemin nodded, though Dalho could not see him. "Any word from the deep exploration teams?" "They report that the entities we encountered 6 months ago have withdrawn to their previous positions. They appear to have lost interest in our galaxy." "Good," Taemin said. "And the other projects?" "The younger species integration programs are proceeding ahead of schedule. The Altarian system refugees have been successfully relocated. The scientific exchange programs are producing remarkable advances in theoretical physics." Taemin smiled. These were the parts of humanity's new role that he enjoyed most. Not the displays of overwhelming power, but the quiet work of helping civilizations grow and prosper. "One more question, Captain," he said. "Do you believe we made the right choice in revealing ourselves?" Dalho was quiet for a moment before responding. 6 months ago, I would have said no, he admitted. The galaxy was not ready for the truth about what exists beyond their understanding. But seeing how they have responded to the challenge, yes, I believe we chose correctly. Even though it means we can never go back to being hidden. Ambassador, we were never really hidden. We were just waiting for the right moment to step forward. That moment came when the galaxy needed us most. Taemin ended the communication and continued looking out at the stars. In the distance, he could see the running lights of ships from dozens of different species, all moving freely through space, under humanity's protection. It had not been the future they had planned, but it was perhaps the future they had been meant to create all along. 3 days later, Lieutenant Wu Jin stood on the bridge of the patrol ship Mokpo, reading the latest reports from across the galaxy. The numbers told a story of transformation that would have seemed impossible just months before. "Remarkable," he said to Captain Hana, who was reviewing the weekly intelligence summaries. "What is remarkable, Lieutenant?" she asked. "Everything," Wu Jin replied, gesturing at his display screens. "Trade volume is